Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar of the Productivity and Profitability webinar series. This series is being brought to you by Meat and Livestock Australia and Agrista. The MLA Productivity and Profitability series is designed to assist sheep, cattle and goat producers to increase the productivity and profitability of their business. The series will provide timely technical information relevant to producers across Australia. My name is Ellie Hayes and I am a consultant with Agrista and I will be your host for tonight's webinar. In this webinar, we will be hearing from Deb Scammell about mineral supplementation for beef and sheep. Before I hand over to Deb, I'd like to cover off on a bit of housekeeping for this webinar. Tonight's webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be available on the Agrista and MLA websites. We do invite you to ask questions for Deb throughout the webinar and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. To ask a question, please head to slido.com and put the code in hashtag #OCT2024. To gauge our audience tonight, I'd like to start with a short intro survey for you to all to fill out. If you haven't already logged in, you can also scan that QR code that is on the screen. I won't display all the answers on here, but I do find this one a good one to display on screen to show who is online tonight. So I will give you a bit of time to fill out the short questionnaire. If you're having any issues, let us know. If you're just joining us, we're just filling out a quick questionnaire to gauge the audience tonight. So if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to the questionnaire. I'll just wait for a few more responses. There you go. I think we nearly got everyone, so I might keep going. So for those of you that don't know Deb Scammell is a livestock consultant at Talking Livestock based in Clare Valley. She assists producers with nutrition and production planning in their sheep and beef enterprises. She consults directly to farmers and runs industry courses and projects. Prior to starting her business, Talking Livestock, Deb worked in the commercial nutrition space in several different roles covering technical, sales and national management. Deb has also been involved in sheep genetic programs and DNA, EID technology, and extension and sheep research. Deb graduated from Adelaide University with a Bachelor of Agricultural Science with honours in Animal Science and has studied ruminant nutrition post-graduation. I'll pass over to Deb now.
Great, thanks very much, Ellie. I'll just share my screen with you all before we kick off and just make sure we're gonna get that working. Yep, so can you see my main screen again, Ellie? Perfect.
Yeah,
thanks
Deb.
very much. Yep, thank you. So thanks very much for having me. Tonight, as Ellie said, I'll be covering mineral supplementation for beef and sheep. So I'll be going through lots of different options for mineral supplements, and I'll also go through a bit of background on why we need to supplement, and then we'll also talk a little bit about cost effectiveness. So as Ellie said, if you've got any questions as I'm talking, put them in Slido because I'm looking forward to hopefully covering what you need tonight. But as I said, I'm going to kick off with firstly why we actually need supplementation. So there's many different reasons we're all looking at supplements. So I'll go through some of those, and also just some limiting factors to production, just to make sure we're not just utilising mineral supplementation when we should be potentially looking at some other things first. I'll also run you quickly through the types of minerals because I just found the supplement space a bit of a minefield now with so many products that it's just so hard for you guys to get your head around what you actually need and whether it's overkill or whether it's going to give you an advantage. So I'll help upskill you hopefully in that sort of space. And then we're going to spend a bit of time looking at methods of supplementation, just so you can have a look at what might suit your enterprise the best. And at the end, I'll sort of go through a bit of a exercise on comparing costs of supplements, because probably one of the most crucial things really is just checking that you're getting value for money. As I said, there's so many products when you walk into a reseller, it's good to have an idea of what you're needing yourselves. So first, I'm just going to kick off with, why and when we sort of need supplementation. So, obviously we're all in very different regions on this webinar being sort of national. So there's going to be little, different areas and different feed types that we're going to be looking at things. But realistically, one of the main reasons we need to supplement is country or feeds that are likely to be mineral deficient. So, there's things such as, if we're grazing canola, sulfur may help in that case. Same as grazing cereals, often magnesium can be an issue there. Feeding cereal grains, we're likely to need calcium to help balance it out. And then, if you're in a coastal type area, often your copper cobalt could be holding back production. So that's, cases where we're likely to have pure deficiencies, or the type of feed we're putting down the animal's throat, we're basically needing to balance out that feed. So, if you're not sure where you sit in that space, feed tests and mineral tests on feeds can give you some idea of where your deficiencies are likely to be, either in a feedlot or supplementation ration or of pastures. And we can also do things like plant tissue testing and soil testing that can help us work out if we're likely to have some mineral deficiencies. And then, as a nutritionist, that can help me sort of work out whether we need to be focusing on certain microminerals or macrominerals to balance out what we're doing there. Another reason we sometimes use supplementation is just to improve animal performance. So, an example of that might be that you're coming into pre-joining. You might have just minor sort of micromineral deficiencies, but by actually boosting those levels, we can sort of improve that egg and sperm production and get a sort of better joining result. So that's an example of when we might use minerals to help us sort of improve animal performance. And also improving the balance of our feed can often assist sort of growth rates and performance on some of those feeds too. We also then have other times we need to supplement, which could be when we're seeing health issues associated with mineral deficiencies. So, in the southern states, I see a lot of calcium deficiency, and often it's due to feeding cereal grains and hays and grazing type cereals. So, you know, health issues associated with that. We often have problems like hypocalcemia over lambing or during lactation. There's a bit of a link to prolapse prior to lambing with calcium deficiency. And also in a feedlot, it can cause things like urinary calculi. You know, we can also get other sort of health issues. So selenium deficiency can lead to sort of sway back in lambs. We can have B1 deficiency in cattle or sheep, which can lead to stargazing. So there's many different examples where we'll see health problems, which are often associated or coming from sort of those mineral deficiencies. And often blood testing or autopsies can help you figure out if you're having health problems associated with those things. Frozen for some reason. Hang on. Sorry, we're alive. Yep. So when we look at when we need to supplement, as I said, there's these many different times when we're likely to need to supplement. But when I look at sort of animal performance, so when we're looking at livestock production and our overall performance, we're looking, you know, at this barrel concept. I really love it because when we look at overall performance, there's always a minimum sort of thing that's holding us back. So, you know, the trouble I see with supplementation is, you know, sometimes we can get stuck thinking we may have a macro mineral or micro mineral deficiency that's holding us back. But often at times it can be energy, protein, or fiber. So the basics of nutrition. So, you know, I love putting this triangle and also this barrel up. So I encourage you when you go home and look at your supplement program, just make sure you're first ticking the box on energy, protein, and fiber for the class of stock you're running. And then underneath that, we look at these macro minerals here. So, you know, the main ones, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, sulfur, and salt are shown there. So they're minerals we need large quantities of. And then we've got micro minerals, which are things like your cobalt, selenium, copper, manganese that you need sort of smaller, like often milligrams per day quantities of. And then we've also got vitamins that we need. So within your vitamins, you know, particularly in the southern or South Australia at the moment, we've had a really long run of dry times. We're starting to see some A and E deficiency. And I mentioned before, B1 deficiency is often associated with rumen dysfunction. So they're probably the most common sort of 3 vitamin deficiencies we're likely to see. But as I said, make sure you tick the box on the 3 nutritional things that come in food. And then underneath, we can see whether mineral or vitamin supplementation is likely to improve your performance. So, you know, the hard thing when we talk about mineral supplementation is there's this real complicated circle of all of these minerals that interact with each other. So you can see there, it's an absolute mess of minerals basically interacting within the rumen and can hold back absorption of particular minerals. So, you know, one of the common one is magnesium and calcium. So you can see there, they're connected across that circle. In excess of one or the other can affect basically absorption of the other one. So, you know, often we find we've got a calcium deficiency and it can also be affected by magnesium. Another really common one is potassium and magnesium. So, you know, anyone that's encountered grass tetany in cattle, it's a magnesium deficiency, but often aggravated by elevated levels of potassium. So the hard thing with minerals is you can't destroy everything at animals, because if you end up with too much of something, more than what you need, it can actually tie up absorption of another mineral that you might actually require. So just remember, everything you do with minerals, you've got these interrelationships and reactions coming with others. And I'll talk in a sec about how we can avoid these sort of issues with supplementation. So, you know, as an example of this, this has come from a paper, a trial that was done, contribution of dietary magnesium in farm animals. Basically, we've got, as I said, with your magnesium absorption, there's a trial there with low potassium, medium potassium, and high potassium. And you can see on the left here that basically the low potassium in the animal has basically meant that, you know, over 40% of the magnesium's been absorbed. as the potassium starts to get higher, we've dropped down to 35%, and with higher potassium levels, we're down at 25% absorption of that magnesium. So, if we've got high potassium coming through from fertilizers into pastures, and then we're supplying large amounts of magnesium to combat grass tetany, it's possible you're only going to get sort of 25% of that absorbed. So it's important, that's where your soil tests and plant tissue tests can give you the overall picture if you're starting to have health issues or deficiencies, to work out if there's something else going on other than what you're just seeing in the animal. So, I wanted to touch just briefly on bioavailability. So, I think realistically, when we look at minerals being sold, you'll hear people say, we use this one because it's more bioavailable and you're going to get more out of it. So I guess for me, it's just giving you a bit of an understanding of the science, so you understand whether it's a sales pitch or it's something you should be paying a little bit more for. So when we look at bioavailability of minerals, it's basically the proportion of an ingested mineral that will be absorbed by the animal. So depending on the mineral type, we've got inorganic and organic minerals, and I'll go through organic minerals with you a little bit more shortly. But even within our inorganic minerals, we've got all these different types of minerals. So we've basically got your sulfates, oxides are two of the common ones, and generally sulfates are more bioavailable than oxides. So that means if you're providing mag sulfate or mag oxide, an animal will be able to absorb more of the mag sulfate than the mag oxide. But when you look at nutritional supplies of supplementation products, there's also different concentrations of magnesium inside those products. So often oxides need to be used because they've actually got a higher percentage of, say, magnesium. So to get the levels we need in the supplement, we often need those products. But in the back of your mind, it's worth just looking at, if you've got a severe deficiency, trying to access the mineral types that are more available. So when we look at bioavailability, there's been a real flood onto the market with supplementation of these organic minerals. So when we look at an organic mineral, it is in most cases much more available than an inorganic mineral. And it's not organic as far as organic farming, but it's basically what we call a chelated mineral. So it's actually bound to other products. So when you look at the diagram I've got on the screen there, we've basically got the mineral you're chasing in the middle. So that's your standard inorganic mineral, and then it's bound to other products. So basically organic components, which can basically protect the mineral and allow the absorption of it more effectively in the rumen or intestine. So these binds basically help protect the mineral there in the middle, and it also means this mineral doesn't have sites to react with other mineral types. So when we look at something like selenium, say, that would interact with other microminerals, giving an organic form of selenium will basically mean we'll have higher absorption of that mineral. So in general, it means we can feed much smaller amounts and get a higher availability of it to the animal, or a higher proportion of it absorbed, which means we get a better sort of performance response to it. So, you'll see a lot of products in the market now that'll have inorganic minerals, but they'll also have a portion of organic minerals, or the more expensive products will often have a lot of organic microminerals or chelated minerals, and it just means they're going to be higher proportion absorbed in the animal. So, they're more expensive when you look at them per kilo, but because you can feed a lot less of them, often you can get a better result for a similar amount of money by using these organic sources of minerals. So, to give you a bit of an example on bioavailability, I've just pulled this out of a paper, which was basically a bit of a look at all the research that's been done on bioavailability of different types of microminerals in 22. And so, looking at copper, for example, for sheep, you see there you've got all these different forms of copper. So we've got the chelated copper. So that's what I just went through. That's the organic form. So we've got 100% bioavailability for that. Copper carbonate, we've got 97%. Once we come down to something like copper oxide, we're back down here at 81%. So, basically you're getting 20% more absorption by the ruminant by using those chelated minerals. And depending on the product, those figures can be quite different as far as availability to the animal. So just something to keep in the back of your mind when you're looking at all these different forms of minerals. So I'm just going to swing now into methods of supplementation because, as I said, there's so many products for you guys that there was quite a high proportion of primary producers on the webinar. There's just so many products available. I just feel like every year there's just more and more coming on the market. And I think for you guys that are farmers or even the advisors that are on talking to farmers, it's really just almost going in there with a list of what you need rather than being sort of sold what's being given to you. So, I guess one of the most common ways to supplement is this salt-based methodology. So, for years and years, we've had these salt blocks shown here on the left. And I think, realistically, the problem with salt blocks in the past is they needed huge amounts of molasses and salt to hold them together and as an attractant, and then you had such a small space left for the actual macro minerals, micro minerals and vitamins the animals need. So, when we look at some of the products that have been around for years, when you look on the product label, you can end up at 50 to 60% salt and molasses, which is only really leaving you that 40 to 50% for the macro minerals we need. So, I guess, as I said, if you're supplementing for deficiencies or performance reasons, you've got to have an understanding of how many grams of some of these macro minerals you might need a day. And, often in these old salt block formulations, you'd end up really getting only a quarter of what they're actually requiring to balance out the feed. So, I used to be a strong fan of loose licks only because we could drop the salt level down. So, we could go down to 20-25% salt and then per mouthful get a whole heap more macro minerals, micro minerals and vitamins. In saying that, there are a lot more salt block formulations. There's different methods of compressing these now, which means we can actually get salt blocks that are lower salt as well that can actually deliver higher quantities of what we're chasing. But when we look at salt, salt's an attractant. Every animal has a salt requirement a day, but it will also pull up intake. So it is a very effective way of getting appropriate supplement levels out to animals. So sheep will eat sort of that 8 to 10 grams per head per day of salt, and cattle will eat sort of that 35 to 40 grams of salt per day. So, if you know that, you can work out whether the dose rate on the label is sort of appropriate, and then you can work out your quantity of, say, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, whatever you're chasing per day is as well. In saying this, there's many areas where salt supplementation doesn't work. So anywhere where we've got quite high saltier water, or, salt bush or high salt plant sort of country, stock that are grazing that sort of feed for a long period of time, they'll actually often consume for sheep sort of up to 200 grams of salt per day. But they're getting most of that from the plant, so they're actually not going to go for a salt-based supplement. But in, other pasture areas, they can be quite an effective tool. The question is always, whether 100% of the animals are getting it or whether there is that 5 to 10% potentially that aren't getting levels when you're needing it for, issues like grass tetany and things where the quantity of magnesium a day is absolutely critical. So, when we look at other supplement methods, water dosing has become quite a good way to get a mineral across all animals. So, I've put a few sort of methodologies up there. So, U-dose, the one on the left is DIT AgTech, which have got quite a lot of products on the market now, and they actually come with this dosing sort of setup that you can see pictured there. So yeah, the idea with water dispensing is that you need that consistent quantity of product going through the water. The other problem is that we obviously want the animals to be consuming a known quantity from the trough. So, as you all know, water consumption changes so much over the year. So assuming your stock are relying on a trough, we find with the sheep, they can go anywhere from, 1 litre if they're on lush feed up to sort of 10 litres if they're on dry feed and it's hot. So, trying to get the correct quantities out can be a bit of an issue. But yeah, these products are basically designed to dispense in at a known quantity, which you can adjust if they're drinking sort of more or less across the year. But I'll talk about the cost of proportions of minerals at the end of this webinar. Probably one thing, I see with water formulations is there is a huge range of what they're actually giving you a day. So, when we look at phosphorus supplementation, for example, there'll be some water-based products that'll give you, the 5 to 8 grams a cow will need a day of phosphorus, and there'll be some products that are still advertised as phosphorus products that'll give you 0.5 gram a day. So I really encourage you to look at the dose rate, the cost, and exactly what you're getting as far as mineral. The other issue with water supplementation, obviously, is any time that there's other water sources around the paddock. So, if you've got dams or springs or other things that fill, then, it realistically isn't a very reliable option to get those mineral levels through to your stock. So, use plenty, especially in a lot of sort of northern country, molasses-based products. And I think realistically, where we can't rely on salt as an attractant, we often do have to go back to these molasses-based products. And that's because, trying to get especially cattle over to a supplement is quite tricky, where molasses, they really get a taste for it and you can get really good uptake of supplements. So, there are some formulated products on the market that will contain, your urea, your phosphorus, your calcium, magnesium, or other people will just use molasses as a base. And, with good mixing, you can basically mix some dry mineral products through your molasses mix and feed that to animals. So when we look at molasses, it is quite a good source of energy as well. So it's got sort of just under 9 megs per kilo of molasses. So, for animals in dry times, cattle will often consume 2 to 3 kilos of it a day. You're getting a bit of an energy hit, but it contains no protein, and it's also quite low in phosphorus. So yeah, if you're in dry areas that are phosphorus deficient, often you'll be putting urea for protein well mixed through and phosphorus or something in with that formulation to supply what the animals kind of need. And on the right there, we've just got a liquor drum, so that can just sort of help limit the consumption of molasses. But often the pre-formulated products, things like urea, can be quite bitter. So you can find that you can restrict intake quite well with an appropriate sort of mix through that molasses. So, one of the other products, and exciting that it's well available back on the market now. So the Coopers have had these permatrace products on the market for years. Was developed by CSIRO many years ago, but yeah, there's been a few supply issues which sound like they're sort of ironed out now. So, in areas, as I said earlier, your coastal type areas where you're often copper, cobalt and selenium deficient, these pellets, or people will call them supplement sort of bullets, can be quite an effective way of supplementing for long periods of time. So, in coastal areas where I have clients, the fact that we can get sort of 3 years out of these supplements mean, breeding ewes or cows, for example, where we know we're just going to have ongoing deficiencies and performance issues, it can basically just allow those to be ironed out for a long period of time that you don't need to worry about those animals. So, they're basically a pellet that's inserted inside the rumen, and with two of them together, they're basically just bumping into each other, or you put just a metal bullet in there too. And as the two of them agitate against each other in the rumen, they're basically slowly letting go. So we've got, for your cobalt, for example, small amounts of cobalt oxide. But yeah, there's a lot of CSIRO sort of papers behind these, where, I've found in coastal country, if you've got a reasonable deficiency, it actually will allow those animals to be at more of a normal blood level for up to that sort of 3 years of time. So they can be quite an effective way, but obviously a long-term approach rather than your short-term sort of supplements. So, if you're looking at sort of steers or lambs that are going to be sold off your place, often we'll look at some of those other methods for those, but your core breeding stock, you can look at a product like that for those ongoing deficiencies. So we look at things like foliar sprays, and they're often quite common. So we've got a cereal crop there. There's quite a few products that are manufactured now that you can just spray sort of calcium and magnesium over a paddock. So as I said, with grazing cereals, lambing on cereals or calving, we often have those sort of grass tetany or hypocalcemia type issues. So spraying an application of calcium mag can mean each mouthful, they're actually getting that elevated level of mineral on each piece of grass. The problem with this is as the plant grows, you actually need to reapply. So, often you're only getting that 2 to 3 weeks of sort of supplementation. But if you're having serious issues sort of over lambing or calving, it can give you that sort of fix, and then a reapplication sort of required. So, I guess as I said earlier, for me, like you guys walk into a reseller and I get the phone calls all the time. It's like, what should we do? We've gone into the reseller. Here's this whole handful of flyers that we've got that we can access. So, we've got a 10% phosphorus block. We've got a different product for sheep there. We've got a bag of loose lick. We've got another type of block, and another type of cattle loose lick that's just come out. So, I think for you guys, the minefield out there of supplements now is just getting harder. And, I look at a few of the products there, you can see they've got this full nutritional spec. So we've got the full spec here of what we're buying, and here and here. And then we get some products that'll give you just some macro mineral levels, but it won't give you micro mineral levels. Some won't give you vitamins. Some won't give you any levels. So I guess I encourage you guys as producers or in consultants, basically, ask what you're buying, because, as you'll see from my cost of mineral, if you don't know what's in a product, how do you know if it's giving you what you need? So, other countries basically have it legislated now that you need to have a label, and I can't wait till we're there in South Australia, because I think buying a nutritional product with no concept of what's in it is just a mess as far as a producer, just because if you're chasing a deficiency and you know what you need, but you can't find a product with a label to match, it just gets you nowhere. So, encouraging you to chase down a nutritional spec if you can, and then compare the spec to see if it's actually what you're needing. So when we look at, say, salt content and intake, so as I said, salt-based products are so popular and they can be really good products. But when you look at these two products, this can be quite common, especially when you look at blocks. So we've got one product of 50% salt. The rest of the product's the same. And then we've got this product here at 25% salt. So when we look at intakes, we're going to get a lot higher intake of this low salt product, because the sheep, if we look at sheep, they're going to eat until they hit their 10 grams of salt per day, and then they're going to pull up. And so you can imagine they're going to get a lot more magnesium and calcium in the day than what this 50% salt product is. So, often they'll pull up on salt before they get anywhere near their macro mineral requirements, especially if they're coming into lambing or they're on a deficient sort of grazing cereal. So, looking at those levels of, just salt or molasses or your base product first is really important. And then we look at the cost of supplements. So, as I said, you need to basically know what's in the product to compare if you're getting value for money. And, I haven't even really talked about feedlot supplement products, but I find that just even harder. Again, there's so many products that won't even tell you, say, an acid buff level on a product. And you think, we're adding it to a feedlot diet to basically avoid acidosis, but we can't even get a level of what buffers and things are in there. So, I really encourage you to try and buy products that you know what you're getting, because then you know if it's meeting your needs. But, this is a common one. This is 2 phosphorus products that are on the market. So, plenty of northern producers chasing lower salt, but higher phosphorus products. Most of these high phosphorus products will have a fair proportion of calcium in them, whether you need it or not, because they use it as basically the base of the product. So they'll use a phosphorus source that has a proportion of calcium, or they'll use limestone to bulk out the product because it's quite cheap. So yeah, really chasing whether you actually need calcium, and then, having a high quantity of phosphorus is often the target. So, when you look at this product on the left, they're both loose leaks. It's $9.20 a tonne. Sounds expensive. It's 5% salt, 14% calcium, 12% phosphorus. And, we've got similar microminerals and vitamins in there. The one on the right, cheaper. So if we go in looking for a cheap bulker bag price, $7.40 a tonne. Similar levels, slightly higher in salt, slightly lower in calcium, slightly lower in phosphorus. But, maybe 9% phosphorus is still going to get us our 10 grams per cow per day if we can get them to consume enough. But what we do, and I encourage you guys to do if you know it is phosphorus or calcium or magnesium or whatever the mineral is you're chasing, selenium, copper, cobalt, basically we're going to work it back through a cost per kilo of the mineral you're chasing. So, when we look at costs per kilo of phosphorus, basically you just need to work out within the tonne of product how many kilos of the thing you're chasing. So, if you're having grass tetany issues over winter, the product you're chasing is magnesium. So you can do the same thing by looking at the magnesium levels in the, 15 grass tetany products that might be on the market. And you can also look at what you're getting in kilos, per litre of mag in a water-based product. So we've got 12% phosphorus. That means we've got 120 kilos of phosphorus for every tonne of product. So in the bulker bag, we're actually getting 120 kilos of phosphorus. So if that product's costing us $920 a tonne, if we do the 920 divided by 120 kilos of phosphorus, it's actually costing us $7.67 per kilo of phosphorus. And that's the whole reason we're putting that product out, is because we need the phosphorus. When we look at the second product, 9% phosphorus. So, on bag price, we would have taken that one home at $7.40 a tonne, but that's only got 90 kilos of phosphorus per tonne of product. So $7.40 a tonne divided by the 90 kilos, it's actually coming out at $8.22 per kilo of phosphorus. So we're getting calcium and salt and maybe some other things we don't really need, but per unit of phosphorus, it's basically the top one that looked more expensive is actually going to come up cheaper for us every time. So I encourage you, when you go into the minefield, of what's available in a reseller, or if you're an advisor trying to sort through products, as an independent advisor now, I don't recommend any products without a label, or that the company won't give me a quantity of micromineral or macromineral or vitamin, just because, when I'm recommending it to producers, if I don't know what's in it, and chatting with Coopers today, one of the, things I want with the permatrace is, I get asked all the time, can we do selenium supplementation in our drench on top of permatrace? And without knowing that raw level of what we're supplying, it's impossible to know whether we're going into toxicity range or whether we're overcoming the deficiencies we've identified from, say, a soil test. So, I encourage you guys as producers or consultants, make sure we've got a label and we actually know what we're purchasing or what we're recommending, because it's going to give you a successful outcome basically from your supplement program, because it's supplying what you're needing or what your deficiencies are in the animals. So, in summary, and I've covered a bit of that, but, I think the most critical part is work out why and what you need to supplement with. So, I probably see a lot of, the neighbour found this product worked really well over calving or worked really well over lambing. But, depending on your production system, what crops you're grazing, what your pasture's like, what your soil type is, whether you're coastal, whether you've got some deficiencies within those animals, your supplement needs will really change. So, I probably find people will, either overspend or underspend on supplement. It's really just identifying what your needs are and making sure you're supplementing with the right thing based on those needs. So, there's vets, agronomists and consultants that can all help you in that space if you're not sure what your sort of needs are across a sort of production cycle. And then, we've touched briefly on those interactions that can happen with minerals. So I think realistically, if you're seeing deficiencies in animals, and you're thinking most other things are quite balanced, you do need to look out for, sometimes we see even in water, say, a common one is high fluoride in bore water that'll tie up phosphorus in the animal. So we don't have a northern phosphorus deficiency potentially, but it can be the minerals coming through in the bore water that are reducing absorption of phosphorus, and then the animals are displaying that sort of deficiency. So, sometimes if you have got a real deficiency, especially with micro minerals, those chelated or organic type minerals can really help as far as absorption and sort of bioavailability. And then, we've covered the main forms of supplementation, but I think for you guys, just working out which methods actually work for you. So, salt base is very common, but sometimes water, molasses, foliar spray, some of those options may be better for your enterprise. But as I said, we're spread nationally here. So depending on where you're farming or advising, there's going to be different solutions for different producers. But then also just looking for an economical way to get what your livestock need. So, it may not be the main product that's sitting in the reseller. It might be something else that, doesn't have high calcium, but it has the high phosphorus, or gives you that magnesium calcium balance you need. Or, I find with grain feeding, we're doing a lot of containment feeding. It's very dry in South Australia. Sometimes lime and salt is all we need early, and then we can go on to some more expensive licks sort of as we get into those high production times. So I think realistically, sometimes advice can help you sort out all the chaff and all the stuff you're being given to purchase, and work out economically over a production season where your sort of real deficiencies and fall down sort of spots might be. But yeah, that's all I wanted to cover, but hopefully you've all been putting your questions in Slido. Thanks for your attention tonight, and I'll hand back to Ellie just to ask me a few questions, hopefully. You're muted, Ellie.
Yeah. Thanks, Deb. That was a really good presentation. I'll just share my screen. And get through some questions. If anyone didn't get the Slido, you can scan this QR code if you have any more questions. It's got 15 minutes left of the webinar. Just a couple at the moment, Deb. Do you know if magnesium help with mastic in sheep in normal season?
Mastitis, was it?
Mastic, but I'm thinking mastitis.
Yeah. I don't think there's a link to magnesium, but there is a link to hypocalcemia with mastitis. So the fact that magnesium and calcium absorption are tied up together, I think it would have a minimal effect also. But yeah, there's definite research that's shown hypocalcemic ewes that sort of get through that lambing process are often slightly more prone to mastitis.
Yeah. Another one, which I think you touched on, but with so many supplements on the market, where do you suggest we start?
Yeah, and I think I did cover that pretty well, just because I find it so frustrating now, because I just think even if I sort of recommend products I'm really happy with, and I've often will say 3 or 4 top brand names, I find producers will often come home with something else because it's all the reseller has. So it's that real clear idea of what you're needing. And, I think being very firm on what you're chasing because you know the reasons why as far as a brand name and a product. So, I think realistically just making sure, if you're getting sold an alternative product, you've in your head, you've almost got that, you need, say, 15% calcium and 8% magnesium and 25% salt. So if they're trying to sell you something that's 50% salt and different spec of calcium magnesium just because it's on the shelf, it's not what you're chasing. So it is that real firm idea of what you're needing. And, between a vet consultant, a production advisor that helps you, if you're not sure yourself, it's getting that help so you know across a year what sort of products you need.
Yep. Sweet. Another one, because mag calcium salt in equal quantities is commonly used for cows to prevent grass tetany.
Yeah.
Are those ratios good?
Yeah, that does work quite well. Yeah. Yeah, so it is you do need the mag and calcium, and then D3 is also tied up in the absorption of those two. So it's hard to say an exact ratio depending on what you're grazing, because often on, say, grazing cereals would go slightly higher in mag. So it depends a little bit on what your deficiencies are in your pastures. But yeah, that is a common standard recommendation, which can meet a lot of needs, but it would depend on that whole picture, I guess.
Yeah. Do young cattle on lush green grass need magnesium to balance rumen?
Yeah, so often it's often in your lush grass you do have quite a lot of all deficiencies, and that's just because the water content is so high compared to the nutrient portion, and especially when it's growing quickly, you're likely to have less minerals. So it does help slightly. I'd probably encourage you, I think we probably don't do enough testing often across a growing year. Like if you're on similar lush pasture every year, I love feed testing, but also just sending it somewhere that can also do mineral testing, and that'll give you a really good picture of where your deficiencies are. So, mag isn't required in excess unless you've got deficiencies. So I wouldn't just be putting it in unless you've got a huge, a deficiency of mag, but it's potentially on lush feed, you would definitely have a deficiency anyway, I'd presume.
And what is the mag and calcium requirements of a sheep per day?
I can probably just send that out if you like. Have you got an email, Ellie, on that question?
No, but I can.
Yeah, so if they
Yeah,
type it into you on Slido.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you want to type that into Slido, I've got some good tables, or you can find my details and flick me an email. I'll send you some good tables, because as sheep are growing or through pregnancy and lactation, the requirements start to increase substantially. So I can send you sort of the yearly requirements as we go across a production year.
Oh, sweet. Thanks, Deb. Regarding the system where multiple minerals in multiple containers are left out for animals to self-select, can animals seek out trace minerals they need?
I'm probably not 100% convinced, but I have had clients that have sort of tried that setup. So yeah, I think, there's definitely minerals that animals will chase as they have higher and lower needs, but there's also taste that comes into it a little bit with stock. So, even when we look at products like mag oxide, that often they've got a bit of a craving for magnesium, but it's quite bitter. So, I think within micro minerals, the same issue, especially with cattle, I find taste wise, it can be hard to get them to a product, even if they're needing it, just because that pure taste that they don't like. So I think, when we look at some of the pre-made formulations, there are products that are bitter that they use flavorings and, a lot of trials to sort of get consumption right. So yeah, I guess when you're doing free choice, that's taken out of it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Deb, for your insights into mineral supplementation. Thank you everyone who joined us tonight for tonight's webinar. If you have any additional questions or suggestions for the further future webinar topics, please reach out by completing the survey on Slido. This feedback helps us to guide future webinars. If you are listening to the recording, please also complete this survey. Thank you again for attending, and we look forward to you joining us in our next webinar on Performing Under Pressure by Natalie Johnston. If you missed last month's webinar, head over to the MLA and Agrista website to watch it. Be sure to check out our podcast series. You can find it on all major podcast platforms under Productivity and Profitability Media Series. Thanks again, everyone. And if you have any more questions, please put in that Slido throughout the week and we'll be able to answer through the podcast or directly through an email. Do you have anything more you want to add, Deb?
No, thanks very much for having me, Ellie.
No worries. Thank you.